Captiva are interested in the early days of the island. The Captiva Library is attempting to gather oral histories from residents who have been part of the story of Captiva. I'm Marion Chapman, and I will be talking with Dorothy Wakefield. Dottie, I believe you started your story with the arrival of your parents on the island. When did they come?
Well, they arrived in the spring of 1924. Mother was pregnant with me.
Yeah.
My father had been very ill and was advised to go south to recuperate. So they arrived on the little steamboat, the Kinsey steamboat from Fort Myers, and got a room at Fisherman's Lodge, Old Fisherman's Lodge.
Excuse me, where was Fisherman's Lodge?
That was later Captiva Lodge, and then it burned, and now there's a condominium down in that section.
Would that be the same?
North of Andes.
Yeah, would that be the same area where Paul Stalin built his house?
He bought that property.
All right, excuse me.
So, the inn was closing, the hotel was closing for the season, so someone suggested that they try and get a room with Mrs. Bishop, who had a cottage up near with what was later Twin Waters. So she took them in. They stayed for several months, and my father recuperated, and then they went home. And I was born, and they came down again in the fall and rented a cottage just several doors from Mrs. Bishop's. And they stayed in that all winter. They'd fallen in love with the island, of course. So in the spring of 25, they bought a cottage just south of there that had belonged to, I believe her name was Miss Fitzgerald, something like that. She had been the Dickey boys' private teacher. And they bought this little one-room cottage and remodeled it, did it over. Added on a couple of rooms. And they came every winter, and that was our winter home. They built one cottage in the front toward the Gulf. It was just to be a little guest cottage for family and friends. But either the banks closed or something happened back there, and there was not any money anymore. So they decided if anyone came down to visit, they would have to pay, and that was the start of Twin Waters.
Very good.
So Mother began to cater little luncheons and things like that. Then each year they would build a new cottage, and that was the start of Twin Waters.
What was down here then as far as houses in the late 1920s?
There were no houses south of Twin Waters that were actually occupied except an old boathouse down on the bay near the, I can't think of the name of the people who own it now, south of Jean Hayford's. Clara Strand and her husband, Captain Strand, lived there, and she had her shell shop.
Yeah.
And he guided from there. And as far as I can remember, that was the only house that was occupied.
South of Twin Waters.
Yeah, and then she wrote Mother that it burned. She said it got so damn hot it burst and burned to the ground. So she moved into an old shack near the Gulf. But beyond that, beginning at the bridge, just north of the bridge was the old Turner House. They had homesteaded this end of the island. And that Turner House is about across from the house that Lloyd Wright has now, the Replow House. It's on the bay side.
That would be the Turner for whom Turner Beach is.
Walter Turner.
Yeah.
His father had homesteaded
I see.
the land.
Yeah.
Then there was another house right at the S-curve where the Ruman property is now. That was the old Titchener house, but that too was falling down. It was just a cistern, and it was just a shambles, just disintegrating as the Turner house was.
Yeah.
And then the little house near the beach, near Jean Hayford's property, that the Strands lived in after their house burned, after the boathouse burned. And until about 1937, when Tunis Clark built what now is the Coleman House, there was nothing south of there that was inhabited except for Clara Strand's shell shop.
But north of it, there were several, I believe.
Yes, some wonderful people from Long Island had come and settled. I don't know when they built the houses, but just north of Twin Waters was the Jagger house that we later bought and took into Twin Waters. Next to that was Mrs. Bishop's, and her daughter Molly Roberts still comes down and stays in the house, so it's still owned by the family. Next to that, Mrs. Bishop's sister, Mrs. Smith, and her husband, Captain Smith, owned 3 cottages, one of which we had stayed in. And now only one of the original cottages is still there. Francis Anderson built a house on the bay where one of them had been, and the Whites now live in where the original Smith cottage was. Then next to that, those were the Thompsons. Yes, I do vaguely remember meeting the Thompsons, but they weren't here for a good many years. That's now called the old Fisher House, and it's been remodeled.
Well, you're stuck.
Mm-hmm.
Well, 2 houses that interest me are the sizable ones. One, which the Dudeks own now, and that must have a background.
Yes, that was built by George Fenton, who had been in the marble business in Knoxville, Tennessee. And he came down with his wife, but she died, I believe, while the house was being built. He went ahead and finished the house. I think it must have been built about early 30s. So I was just a child and remember watching it go up. And it was supposed to have been, he said it was patterned after Ramona's mission in California. And he made a lot of the furniture in it himself, all the old burned, brushed oak, things like this.
Mm-hmm.
The bed headboards had little mission bells swinging up in the peak of the headboard. And he did all the beautiful wrought iron himself, designed it and made it himself on his forge out in his garage. I could remember his watching him do it. Then he married again, and they lived there for quite a few years, and then sold to Alice Marno. A lot of people will remember Alice Marno on the island, Alice and Carl Marno. And then she sold to Clara Gallier. And she sold to the Mathesons, and now the Dudeks owned it. But it was a very interesting house and always my favorite. And he used to play Ramona on his Victrola all the time. He was very, very romantic man, very sentimental.
Another big house there that I think was originally the Loomis House. I don't know if it was originally, but did they build it?
Mr. Loomis, Bud and Chet's father, James Lee Loomis, built it. They could tell you the date. I believe it was about 39, but I'm not too sure.
Yeah.
And Mr. Loomis had been one of the first guests at Twin Waters. And at that time, there were only 2 rooms in the main building, 2 bedrooms. And it turned very cold that night, so he used to tell that he took the rug off the floor and put it on the bed so he could stay warm. But they were very early guests at Twin Waters.
Yeah. Well, Twin Waters, I believe you told me, opened in 1931.
Officially, first the guest book first signature in the guest book was 1931.
How large was it then?
We could accommodate 6 people because they'd made the 2 bedrooms into guest rooms, and we slept out on the porch, screen porch. And then they had the little guest cottage that had been built previously.
How long was Twin Waters open? I mean, during the winter.
Oh, they'd come down in November and close in May and leave. So it was open all winter long.
When was the most popular time, or the quote season?
I think way back it was January, February, and March were the busy times.
Mm-hmm. Well, now they had to, obviously, they enlarged it.
Mm-hmm. They'd build a cottage every winter.
Every winter.
Until they had about 7.
Do you remember anything, because I know you were just a child, but Uh, can you make a guesstimate as to what the rates were then, in the early days?
Well, I don't know whether it was very early days, but I do remember $5 a day American plan, but that might have been in later years.
Well, that's not bad.
We never made much money.
Well, how long did your guests usually stay? I mean, weeks or months?
Oh,
Or?
I think the shortest stay was usually 2 weeks. People stayed usually a month, 2 or 3 months.
Great.
Some would come and stay all season.
How did your guests get there? How did they arrive? By automobile, boat?
Well, of course, the good old days of the ferry before the bridge came across, and they would either take a taxi all the way over sometime, or they would somehow get down to the ferry land and we'd go and pick them up. Or sometime they would arrive by in the little amphibian plane that Buddy Fox would fly over and land right at the dock, let them out.
That would be my preference, I believe, with the roads like they were then.
Fun. Yeah, a lot of people used the little Pelican.
How did you get your supplies in the early days, when your mother was running a kitchen and all that?
Well, the Punta Gorda fish boat used to come down, I suppose, several times a week. I can't remember how often. And they would bring the kerosene, gasoline for the boats, ice for the ice boxes. And then the supplies, the food, would come out on the Dixie or the Gladys, the Kinsey steamers. You'd write an order in, and then a day or so later it would turn up on the mailboat.
And the boat would take the order in,
Uh-huh.
I assume.
I don't remember whether it was mailed or whether they took it. I really can't remember that.
No electricity?
Oh, no. I can't remember when REA put electricity out here, but it must have been, I don't know, not until about early 30s, 34, 35. We had kerosene lamps and candles and
What about the stove?
kerosene stove.
Slightly fire hazardry.
Uh-huh, yeah.
I know that over the years that you have had, or did have, many prominent guests. Can you talk about a couple of them anyway?
Yes, we did. We had quite a few. Everyone wants to know about the Lindberghs, and they did not stay at Twin Waters, but Anne Lindbergh very often had dinners there. Almost every night would come for dinner. And she was a lovely person.
Or was she a person that you could, did she mingle with people?
No, she didn't. She was very reserved and quiet, and everyone just respected her privacy and left her alone, except one man who had been coming to the inn for quite a few years. We were never terribly fond of him anyway. And he asked Mother to introduce him to Anne Lindbergh, and Mother said, well, maybe some connection, tried to find out. And he said, oh, no, I just want to meet her. And Mother said, well, I'm terribly sorry, but I can't introduce you to her. I, respect her privacy.
Good for her.
So he got mad, and they packed up and left, moved to Sanibel the next day.
Another one that I think people would be interested in, we've all heard of, is J. Darling.
Oh, yes. The Darlings first came in 1936. Jay and Penny, his brother Frank and his wife had come ahead of them to find a spot for a vacation place. So they came for years and years, usually in November, and stayed until May.
Great. I understand from what you have told me earlier in our conversations and what I've heard from other people that he was a perfectly charming man.
Oh, they both were just marvelous people.
And he built the fish house, didn't he?
He built a fish house. I think a lot must have happened in 1939, unless my mind's just stuck on it. But I believe it was about 39 he built the fish house. Because I was away at school, and when I came home on vacation, he took me down to see it. And I told him I thought it was a wonderful place for a honeymoon if I ever got married. And when I did marry Johnny Wakefield in 43, Mr. Darling remembered that and offered us the fish house for our honeymoon.
Oh, great. You mentioned something about well, go right ahead and talk, just gently. A marvelous party that J. Darling did when your father was sick.
Yes, it was New Year's Day, I guess, would be 1937, and my father was very ill. And his bedroom was right at the front of Tweenwaters, on the front side, and Mr. Darling fixed up Bouncing Betsy, the trailer that they brought down that year, and made a travel log all the way down. And he had a big sign on the outside of it saying Doc Price's Medicine Wagon, big cartoon. And they started out with the traveling cocktail party. And the first stop was at my father's to give him a little New Year's cheer.
Yeah.
And then they traveled all the way down the island, stopping at all their friends' houses, and they'd have their little parties all along the way. It's the way they celebrated New Year's.
That reminds me of a question just flipped into my mind. At that time, 1930, whatever it was Florida a wet state? I mean, Prohibition had been off, of course. Was Florida wet, or what did you...
Heavens, Marion, I don't know about that, but my father always had his little charred keg of bourbon.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, whether it was legal or not, I don't... Oh, wait a minute, no. Let me back up. Sure, Prohibition, because we used to go over to Sanibel and...
Well, of course, Prohibition was over by then. It was over about 1932, I think. Somewhere in there.
Well, they used to go over to Sanibel and back.
Yeah.
Maybe before that.
Yeah.
I do remember Prohibition vaguely.
I thought of something that we neglected to say earlier. We didn't mention the name of your mother and father, which I think might be nice for the history.
Yes, Grace and Bowman Price.
And he died shortly, around 30.
He died that spring of 37.
37.
Yeah, he was.
And
in fact, he left the island in January, soon after the New Year's party, and never got back to the island. Died that spring. Yeah.
You were mentioning something about the cartoons that Mr. Darling did.
Not a day went by. Daddy was in the hospital from January until he died in April. And not a day went by that Mr. Darling didn't send either a little cartoon, sometime a big cartoon, or a little note or a sketch of something into Daddy to cheer him up.
That's great.
And we had a great collection, and it all burned in the farm in Bristol burned.
Oh,
so
great.
we lost all of them.
Uh-oh.
But he was so thoughtful.
Mm-hmm. Going back year-wise a little bit, when you were growing up, a little bitty girl, did you have anybody to play with down here?
Well, Marie Dickey Coleman and I were the only two children at that time. And we've been friends since we were in diapers together. And just inseparable. All our growing up period. Still are.
Yeah.
Close friends.
Where did you go to school?
We went to Sanibel's elementary school, which is now the Pirate Playhouse.
Huh.
And at that time, we were lugged over the washboard roads. It's a wonder we're in any state of health now. We were bounced over. I think I left the house at 7 in the morning and got on the floor. And we were bumped over to Sanibel. And it was one-room school, 2 outhouses, and one teacher and 6 grades, I believe. Poor thing.
She was right busy.
Went mad.
Yeah.
Nikki, my daughter, later went to Sanibel School, the same old
Oh, it was
school.
still...
Oh, yes, still. But then she had indoor plumbing in two rooms.
Oh.
It just ruined it. Spoiled it.
How many students did they have when you were down there?
I don't know, but there were 4 of us in my grade.
Oh.
Sam Bailey, and a couple of others and myself. 4 in the grade.
Well, how did you and Marie keep yourself occupied other than school? What sort of mischief, if any, did you get into?
We got in quite a bit of mischief. We weren't very good little children, I guess. But I had a little rowboat, and I learned to row it tied up to the dock. that. My father would loosen the lines, and then I'd row a couple of strokes this way and a couple of strokes that way, and that's the way I learned to row. And Marie and I would spend all day on the water. We'd row from one end of the island to the other.
Now, hopefully
Over
you're
the
speaking of in the past.
Yes,
instead
not
of
in the Gulf. No,
yeah.
we didn't go into the passes of the Gulf. We had,
Yeah.
I guess our parents taught us to respect the water, but we would take our picnic lunches and off we'd go and stay all day long. Or we would roam on foot one end of the island to the other.
Well, you mentioned Buck Key. Was anybody living on Buck Key then?
No one was living there. Later years, a man named Edgar Darien lived just about across from where my house is now, down on Roosevelt Channel.
Yeah.
But at that time, it was uninhabited, except for playing around. Later, the Futches lived over there with their collection of pigs, and they fed their hogs with the swill from Tween Waters. They'd row over every day in a little rowboat and pick up what they call the swill and take it over and feed their hogs.
Did, you always read in books about these islands, about pirates, this, that, and the other. I suppose, like all children, you hunted for treasure.
Oh, heavens, yes. We were very imaginative. We thought that, we were convinced that one old lady had killed her husband and buried him in the well in the backyard. We spent hours looking for the well and the body. We never found it.
Never found that. Fortunate, I guess.
Oh, and we thought the poor old man on Buck Key was a spy, and we'd watch. We'd keep watch where he went. He just was a clam digger, a fisherman, something like that. Poor thing. He never knew that we thought he was some great spy. Oh, we had a great time.
Well, as the years passed, you speaking of spies, remind me of the war years, which I presume you spent down here.
Yeah, I was at boarding school. My last year was the year of Pearl Harbor, and I came down the next winter to help Mother at the inn and just, be with her. And by that time, we had beach patrols, Coast Guard, patrol the beaches. And we were heavily blacked out every night. No light could show. We've heard later there were more subs in the Gulf than anyone really realized at the time, but I don't think anyone ever landed here that we know of. But, we were very well protected. The little Coast Guard boys were, just young kids and away from home for the first time. And we'd be sitting around the living room after dinner, and there'd be a knock on the door, and one of them would say, "Could I please have a drink of water?" So we'd say, "Of course, come in," and then he'd motion the whole patrol would come in. But the cook had always made an extra pie or an extra cake or something like that. She always cooked a little bit extra for the Coast Guard, for our protectors. So we'd go back in the kitchen and they'd tell us stories of how homesick they were and about their girlfriends and all that. And then off they'd go to patrol the beaches again.
You met Johnny somewhere in this period, didn't you?
Yes, it was the same winter, and Johnny arrived in the Air Force and was stationed in Venice, but he somehow had himself transferred to Page Field, and he ran the air-to-ground target range on Bowman's Beach. But it just so happened that he rented a cottage and lived on Captiva with his enlisted men.
After having met
It just so happened, yeah.
Dorothy Price.
So we had an island wedding at Tween Waters on the 1st of May in 43.
Actually in Tween Waters.
Actually in Tween Waters, yeah. In the dining room. Everyone on the island was there. Flowers ran past the nuts. And it was really kind of a funny wedding. Some of the guests arrived by Air Force crash boat. That was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And Sandra Coleman asked if she could give the wedding cake. Yeah, okay. Because some people in St. Paul did such a lovely cake, and it was a lovely flat one, not one of these tiered things with bells and stuff. So she ordered it. She told them the wedding was really a couple of weeks before the actual date, because she said it would be better to have a stale wedding cake than no wedding cake at all. It arrived the day of the wedding.
Huh.
covered with cinders and all that, and they brushed and blew the cinders off, sprinkled a little powdered sugar on it, and it was a beautiful cake.
Great. I always like to find out what people that have been here for a long time, what their memories are of such things as hurricanes, because you realize that it's been, how many years? It's been about 20 years since there's been a bad hurricane here, and most people have forgotten all about them. So you, I imagine, were here in 1944. There was a hurricane then, wasn't there?
Yes, there was a hurricane, and we arrived just a few days after the storm. And Twin Waters was not damaged. In fact, not even Donna damaged Twin Waters. But, the trash around, that was all. But I did take a walk. In those days, I could walk on the beach all the way up to Redfish Pass. I couldn't walk to the post office now, but I remember one day, right after we got here, I walked up to Redfish, and so much of the beach had washed away that I didn't even know where I was. I didn't even recognize the island. Hundreds of feet of beach had washed out in that one storm.
So our erosion problems are not recent.
No.
Do you remember anything about the early situation at South Seas? By that, I mean, did you ever know Mr. Chadwick? Or was that before your
we
time?
knew the Chadwicks. And they, I guess, the main cottage up at Chadwick's, that's now King's Crown and the bar and all that, was sort of the main lounge and dining room way back then, and they had a few cottages around, sort of like Twin Waters.
Yeah.
And took guests. I really can't remember what year they started that.
But Chadwick was still living then.
Oh, yes.
And living in the Manor House.
Yes, which has since been torn down.
Right.
Another bit of the island history gone.
Was was that really, when I first saw it, of course, it just was a two-story white building. And there was so much going on around that you couldn't see whether it really had charm in its old days or not. Was it a pretty old place?
Yes, I think it had charm, and he had his indoor saltwater swimming pool, which impressed me very much as a little child. And he was quite an amazing man.
I imagine that the planting or the natural vegetation was very pretty back then.
Yes, it was. Palms and, of course, his lime groves up there that were still mostly in existence at that time. And I remember an archway of oleander just before you reached the Manor House. You went through just this tunnel of oleander that arched right over the cars. It was perfectly beautiful in spring. And it was in bloom.
Well,
that's gone, too.
Yes. Things have changed.
Things have definitely changed. I can't believe it.
But we can't turn back the time clock.
No, but I wish we could.
So do I.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.